Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! It had been one of those days where everything seemed to go wrong from the moment I woke up. My alarm didn't go off, so I was late for work. Then my boss dumped a huge project on me with an impossible deadline. By the time I left the office, I was exhausted, stressed, and had a pounding headache. I should have taken the train home like I usually do, but I wasn't thinking straight. I saw a bus approaching that would take me to my neighborhood, so I hopped on without considering that it would be a much longer, more stops-filled journey than a train. As I boarded the crowded bus, I spotted an empty seat in the middle of a three-seat row. Grateful to not have to stand for the 45-minute ride, I quickly sat down. That's when I realized my mistake. I was wedged between two people who clearly knew each other. They started chatting excitedly, catching up on old times. Apparently, they had gone to university together years ago and hadn't seen each other since. Any other day, I might have found their reunion heartwarming, but with my throbbing head and frayed nerves, their conversation felt like nails on a chalkboard. I tried to tune them out, but it was impossible. They were practically shouting across me to hear each other over the noise of the bus. To make matters worse, the guy on my left had breath that smelled like he'd eaten a garlic and onion sandwich washed down with sour milk. The stench was making my stomach churn. After a few minutes of torture, I decided to be proactive. I turned to the woman on my right and asked politely, "Excuse me, would you mind switching seats with me so you two can catch up more easily?" She looked at me like I'd suggest that she jump out of the bus. "No, I'm fine where I am," she said curtly before turning back to her friend. Okay, I thought. Maybe the other guy will be more accommodating. I tapped him on the shoulder. "Sir, would you like to change seats so you can talk to your friend more comfortably?" He didn't even look at me as he grunted. "Nah, I'm good." I couldn't believe it. Here I was trying to be considerate and make the situation better for everyone, and they couldn't be bothered to move a few inches. The entitlement was staggering. Fine, I thought. If they won't be reasonable, neither will I. I pulled out my earphones and put them in, cranking up my music to drown out their chatter. But even with the volume maxed out, I could still hear their grating voices and smell that awful breath. That's when inspiration struck. If I couldn't block them out, maybe I could make them want to block me out. I started singing along to my music, loudly. Let me tell you, I am not blessed with a good singing voice. I'm talking way off key, butchering lyrics and the works. At first, they tried to talk over my caterwauling, but I just sang louder. Every time they attempted to converse, I belted out whatever song was playing like I was auditioning for a tone-deaf choir. After a few minutes of this, they finally got the hint. They stopped talking and sat there in stony silence. I kept singing for another minute or two to drive the point home, then quieted down. The rest of the bus stride past in blissful silence. I could feel them glaring at me, but I didn't care. My headache was finally starting to ease up, and I was no longer being assaulted by halitosis. As we neared my stop, I noticed the woman filming me with her phone. She probably thought she was going to shame me on social media or something, and I just smiled and waved at the camera. Let her post it. I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. When my stop came, I stood up and cheerfully said, "It was so nice meeting you both. Hope you have a wonderful evening." The look on their faces were priceless. As I walked home from the bus stop, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of the situation. Here were two grown adults who couldn't be bothered to move seats to have a conversation, forcing a stranger to resort to ridiculous measures just to have some peace. I thought about how my day had started so terribly but ended with this bizarrely satisfying victory over entitlement. It made me realize that sometimes, when faced with unreasonable people, you have to be a little unreasonable yourself. The next morning, I woke up to find that my impromptu concert had indeed gone viral. Someone had posted the video online with the caption, "Crazy guy ruins friend's reunion on bus." But as I read through the comments, I was surprised to see that most people were on my side. "Those two are the real jerks here." One comment read, Who refuses to switch seats in that situation? Another said, I would have done the same thing. Good for him for standing up to their rudeness. There were, of course, some negative comments, calling me immature or saying I should have just sucked it up, but overall, the response was overwhelmingly supportive. Later that day, I got a call from a local news station wanting to interview me about the incident. At first, I was hesitant, but then I thought, why not? It might be fun to tell my side of the story. The interview aired that evening, and I explained the whole situation, my terrible day, the headache, the refusal to switch seats, and the bad breath. I emphasized that I had tried to resolve the situation politely at first and only resorted to singing when they left me no choice. And to my surprise, a reporter then announced that they had tracked down the other two people involved. They had agreed to a brief phone interview to give their perspective. The woman spoke first. Looking back, I feel really bad about how we acted, she said. We were so excited to see each other that we didn't think about how uncomfortable we were making the guy between us. We should have just switched seats when he asked. The man chimed in. Yeah, we were being selfish, and I had no idea my breath was so bad. I had some garlic bread at lunch, and I guess it really lingered. I'm sorry about that. I was floored. I never expected them to apologize, let alone on television. The reporter asked if I had anything to say to them, so I said, I appreciate your apologies. I probably could have handled things better too. Maybe next time we can all remember to be a little more considerate on public transportation. The story quickly became a talking point around town. People would recognize me on the street and ask to take selfies with a bus singer. Some would even jokingly ask me to sing for them. A local theater group even invited me to perform in their upcoming production as comic relief. Of course, I politely declined, explaining that my singing career began and ended on that bus ride. As for me, I went back to take the train. It's faster and there's a lot more room to spread out if needed. But I always keep my earphones handy just in case. You never know when you might need to break into song to combat entitlement. As a software developer for a high profile tech company, I've been putting in long hours and dealing with endless deadlines. The stress had taken its toll and I knew I needed a break. After careful consideration, I chose to visit Hawaii. The idea of relaxing on pristine beaches surrounded by natural beauty seemed like the perfect antidote to my burnout. I spent weeks planning the trip, making sure every detail was perfect. I even splurged on a first class ticket, figuring I deserved a little luxury after all my hard work. The day of my flight arrived and I was buzzing with excitement. I arrived at the airport early, breezing through security with plenty of time to spare. As I waited at the gate, I couldn't help but daydream about the adventures that awaited me in paradise. When it was time to board, I felt a sense of pride as I walked down the jet bridge. I'd worked hard for this moment. I was determined to enjoy every second of it. As I stepped onto the plane, a friendly flight attendant greeted me and directed me to my seat. I found my assigned spot, a plush window seat with ample legroom. It was everything I'd hoped for and more. I stowed my carry-on bag in the overhead compartment and settled in, ready to start my vacation in style. Just as I was getting comfortable, I noticed a commotion a few rows behind me. A woman with an exasperated expression was arguing with another passenger. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the in-flight magazine in front of me. Suddenly, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I looked up to see the same woman standing over me, her face a mix of entitlement and annoyance. Excuse me, she said, but I need this seat. Confused, I explained that this was my assigned seat, but she wasn't having any of it. I don't care what your ticket says. I always sit by the window. It's the only way I can fly without getting sick. I was taken aback by her audacity. Who did she think she was? I tried to reason with her, explaining that I had specifically booked this seat and had no intention of moving, but she wouldn't budge. And to my horror, she reached down and started tugging at my arm, attempting to physically remove me from my seat. Get up! You don't understand! I need this seat! I couldn't believe what was happening. Here I was on what was supposed to be the start of a relaxing vacation, being manhandled by a complete stranger. I looked around for help, but the other passengers seemed too shocked to intervene. Finally, a flight attendant noticed the commotion and hurried over. Is there a problem here? She asked. Before I could explain, the woman launched into a tirade about how she always sat by the window and how it was cruel to deny her this basic right. The flight attendant listened patiently before turning to me. Sir, is this your assigned seat? I nodded, producing my boarding pass as proof. The flight attendant examined it and then turned back to the woman. Ma'am, I'm afraid this gentleman is correct. This is his assigned seat. You'll need to return to your own seat. But the woman wasn't giving up that easily. She started crying, claiming she had a medical condition that required her to sit by the window. When the flight attendant asked for documentation of this condition, the woman's story quickly changed. Now she insisted that her seat was broken and unsafe. As this ridiculous scene unfolded, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and disbelief. How could someone be so entitled? I'd worked hard for this trip, saved up for months, and now this woman was trying to ruin it before it even began? The situation escalated when the woman refused to move, planting herself firmly in the aisle and blocking other passengers from reaching their seats. The flight attendant, realizing this was more than she could handle alone, called for the lead flight attendant and the captain. While we waited for them to arrive, the woman continued her tantrum, alternating between tears and threats. She claimed she knew important people who could have us all fired. She accused me of being selfish and uncaring. At one point, she even tried to guilt trip other passengers into giving up their window seats for her. I sat there stunned by the spectacle unfolding before me. What should have been the start of a peaceful vacation had turned into a nightmare. When the captain arrived, he quickly assessed the situation. His presence seemed to intimidate the woman slightly, but she still refused to back down. The captain explained firmly that she had two choices: return to her assigned seat or be removed from the flight. For a moment, it looked like she might actually leave, but then, in a move that left everyone speechless, she threw herself into my lap, clutching the armrests and screaming that she wouldn't move. At this point, the captain had seen enough. He signaled to the flight attendants, who tried to gently remove the woman from my lap. When that didn't work, he informed her that he was contacting airport security. As we waited for security to arrive, the woman's behavior became even more erratic. She started accusing the crew of discrimination, threatening lawsuits against the airline and me personally. She even tried to rally the other passengers to her cause. But by this point, everyone was thoroughly fed up with her antics. Finally, airport security arrived and took 3 officers to physically remove her from the plane, all while she kicked and screamed about injustice. As she was escorted away, I could hear her shouting that she'd never fly with this airline again, a threat that I'm sure brought relief to everyone on board. While she was gone, a sense of calm settled over the cabin. The captain apologized for the delay and thanked everyone for their patience. As the flight attendants prepared for takeoff, several passengers around me offered words of sympathy and support. As we finally took off, I leaned back in my seat, my rightful seat, and let out a long breath. The ordeal had been stressful, but I was determined not to let it ruin my vacation. In fact, as I thought about it, I realized this experience had given me an even greater appreciation for the trip ahead. Looking out the window at the clouds below, I couldn't help but smile. I'd stood my ground against unreasonable demands, and in doing so, I protected not just my own rights, but those of future passengers who might encounter similar situations. I grew up in a small town in Alabama, where everyone knew everyone else's business. My parents were hard-working folks who instilled in me the value of honesty and trust. As a kid, I was always fascinated by gadgets and technology, which led me to develop a keen interest in unique items like air-powered BB guns. When I turned 19, I was working at the local hardware store, saving up money for college. I had 2 close friends, both named Brian. One was a stand-up guy who I'd known since elementary school, while the other, well, let's just say, he had a knack for finding trouble. The troublemaking Brian announced he was getting married. He approached me one day, all smiles and charm, asking if he could use my credit card to secure a hotel room for his honeymoon. He swore up and down they wouldn't actually charge it. Against my better judgment, I agreed but decided to play it safe by slightly altering some of the card details. The wedding came and went without a hitch, and I thought that was the end of it. Little did I know this small act of trust would lead to a bizarre chain of events that would change my life forever. Fast forward 2 years, I've been eyeing this cool Freon-powered BB gun and a mail order catalog from a company called Great Gun Gear Sales. I finally saved up enough to buy it and placed my order. When the package arrived, I was disappointed to find they'd sent the wrong item. I called the company and they told me they were out of stock on the BB gun I wanted. They offered to let me exchange it for anything else in their catalog. As luck would have it, their warehouse was only about 45 miles away, just across the state line in Florida. I figured I'd make a day trip out of it and drive over to see what else they had in stock. The warehouse was a lot smaller than I'd imagined, crammed with shelves full of hunting gear and various outdoorsy items. As I browsed, I overheard one of the employees answering the phone. He started taking an order, and that's when things got weird. The employee was repeating the customer's information out loud as he wrote it down. I heard my name being spoken, but the address was unfamiliar, somewhere much closer to Florida than where I lived. My ears perked up and I moved closer to the counter, curious about what was going on. As the employee started writing down the credit card information, a chill ran down my spine. I recognized the numbers. They were mine. In that instant, I knew exactly who was on the other end of that call. Without thinking, I walked right up to the counter and slapped my driver's license down on top of the order form. The employee looked annoyed, trying to shoo me away so he could finish the call. I pointed at my name on the license, and suddenly his eyes went wide with understanding. I motioned for him to hand me the phone, which he did after a moment's hesitation. Taking a deep breath, I spoke into the receiver. "Hi, Brian. What the hell are you doing?" The silence on the other end was deafening. I could practically hear the gears grinding in Brian's head as he tried to process what was happening. Here he was, 2 years later, trying to use my credit card information, and by some cosmic coincidence, I was right there to catch him in the act. I told Brian I'd be stopping by his house. The address was right there on the order form, and that I wanted the original paper he'd written my info on, plus any copies he might have made. He stammered out a weak agreement, and I hung up the phone. The drive to Brian's new place was a blur of anger and disbelief. When I arrived, he answered the door looking like he'd seen a ghost. Without a word, he handed over a small stack of papers. The original note was my credit card info and a few photocopies. As I stood there staring at this person I once considered a friend, I felt rage and pity. Part of me wanted to lash out to make him feel as betrayed and violated as I did, but another part of me realized that God had already dealt him a blow far more effective than anything I could do. Instead of getting physical, I decided to let the situation speak for itself. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "I hope you realize how lucky you are that I was the one who answered that phone. Consider this your one and only warning. If I ever catch wind of you trying something like this again, with me or anyone else, I won't be so forgiving." The look on Brian's face was priceless. It was fear, shame, and utter bewilderment. I could tell he was struggling to understand how I'd managed to catch him red-handed from hundreds of miles away. As I turned to leave, I couldn't resist one final parting shot. "Oh, and Brian, you might want to be more careful in the future. You never know who might be watching." With that, I walked away, leaving him standing in his doorway, mouth agape. As I drove home, I couldn't help but laugh at what happened. The odds of me being in that exact place at that exact moment were astronomical. In the weeks that followed, I heard that Brian had become paranoid, constantly looking over his shoulder and jumping at shadows. He'd tell anyone who would listen about how I had some kind of supernatural ability to know when he was up to no good. I never spoke to Brian again after that day, but his attempted fraud had an unexpected silver lining. I became more cautious about who I shared my details with, and I made a point of regularly checking my credit report for any suspicious activity. As for the BB gun that started this whole adventure, I ended up exchanging it for a high-powered telescope. Every now and then, when I'm stargazing, I think back to that day in the warehouse and marvel at how the vast, chaotic universe sometimes aligns in the most unexpected ways to bring about justice. As for me, I was content to let the rumors swirl. After all, a little mystery never hurt anyone. And who knows, maybe the next time someone in our town considers doing something dishonest, they'll think twice, wondering if I might somehow be watching.
And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.